Hi, it's Leela, the Proud Poly Kinky Queer Slut. Today I want to give you some simple sex tips. These are tips that apply across body types, across gender spectrum, and they're just good tips on how to have better sex in general. First tip is take your time and explore. Go slowly and just see what feels good for your partner. I play with people who have penises, people who have vaginas, people who have trans bodies, people who have various, a whole spectrum of stuff going on with their whole bodies. And one thing that I have learned is that all bodies are different. You cannot say certain things work for all penis owners and certain things work for all vagina owners. It's all across the board. And so the best thing that you can do is ask. Slow down, ask. And that leads to tip number two, which is give and receive feedback graciously. So when you're having sex with people, and this is generally in life too, but especially when you're having sex with people, ask for feedback and give feedback. And when somebody gives you feedback about how they want to be touched, then say thank you. Thank them for that feedback, because we're taught to just kind of know that we should just know, and that's just not how it works. And one person might really love a certain kind of touch, and another person might really not like it. So yeah, you need to find out. And the best way to find out is to communicate, to actually get that information from your partner. Now, sometimes that's specific words, sometimes it's sounds, sometimes it's just like making the sounds that say yes, I like that, and being responsive physically. But giving and receiving feedback is really important. Next tip is giving and receiving do not need to be simultaneous occurrences. As a matter of fact, one of the first things that you learn with any Tantra book is to have a giver and receiver be separate designations. So you do not need to be worried about the pleasure of your partner when you're also trying to have an orgasm. So there are this basic concept when it comes to bodily pleasure and orgasms is, you need to take off the brakes. So we are taught so much shame and fear and concern about surrendering to this pleasure. It can also be just scary to surrender to that pleasure, and the feeling of loss of control that can happen. So it's important that we remove those roadblocks, that we remove those barriers, that we dismantle those things that are stopping us from enjoying ourselves. And one good way to start working on that is getting rid of the simultaneous requirement that you be pleasuring your partner as much as you're being pleasured. And communicating with your partner or partners about this, and communicating about when am I giving and when am I receiving, can be really, really beneficial. And sometimes receiving does mean like, I want my hands to be like looking at these things. I want to be sucking on this or that. But it doesn't always. And sometimes it means just being okay, accepting the pleasure and letting it wash through you. Breathing. Remember to breathe. And we're taught the wrong thing sometimes in our culture about relaxing versus tensing. So play with it. So if there's a time when you always tense up when you're close to orgasm or when you're experiencing a certain kind of pleasure, experiment with what it's like to let go and to relax instead of clenching up, or vice versa. Just play around with it. Another important tip is that bodies, it's all the same parts, right? So learn about parts. I do have an extended little video on my channel where I go into all the parts. It's age restricted, but where I go into the actual anatomy, and I encourage you to go into the anatomy of it and just learn about it. But the clitoris is much bigger than we think, and it has a whole internal structure. And the parts of the clitoris are actually the same tissue that are in the penis. So for example, stimulating the bulbs of the legs of the clitoris is very similar to stimulating the shaft of the penis. Stimulating the tip of the clitoris is very similar to stimulating the head of the penis. So, these pieces, they're not as different as we're taught they are. And so a lot of times, like experimenting and touching, don't get hung up on the gender constructs, try different things. And finally, the best way to have better sex is to have orgasm not be the goal of sex, to have pleasurable touch and connection be more the purpose. Because we get in our heads about orgasm. We've been taught that the end of sex is mutual orgasm. Orgasm almost never mutual, meaning never occurs at the same time, not simultaneous. And nothing stops your ability to have an orgasm like a bunch of pressure to have an orgasm. Whereas, if we just enjoy the pleasure of the touch, then that's its own reward. And then if orgasms happen, that's beautiful. And if they don't happen, then they don't happen. And that's okay. And taking that pressure off ourselves can be really good. If orgasm is your goal, if you expressly I'm in this because I want an orgasm, know what your body needs for that. By experimenting. Masturbation's also a really good thing and helps you learn your body, helps you figure out what your body likes, what your body doesn't like, and how to communicate that. But if you're really into it for the orgasm, then make sure your partner knows that and that's the focus, and then play for that end. But generally, I've found more success with relaxing into accepting that orgasm might not be what happens. And also, it's important, especially as women, I'm going to say, because this is one of those things that gets enculturated in us. You are not required to give your male partner an orgasm. Female partners either, but especially you're not responsible for making sure that penis orgasms. And doesn't necessarily have to. And I've personally found that with all this exploration of different kinds of touch and experimenting with harder and harder and softer kinds of touches and different kinds of touches on different parts of the genitalia, that often you can experience different kinds of pleasure than what you've normally thought of, and orgasms in different ways than you necessarily would have thought of if your goal has just been ejaculate orgasm. So I encourage that kind of exploration. It feels really good. And final tip that I'm leaving you with: lube, 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 lube. Experiment with different kinds, get different brands, figure out what you like, silicone versus water-based, all sorts of different things. But lots of lube makes for better sex. Period. Just does. Thanks very much for listening. This is Leela, the proud poly kinky queer slut. Have a great day.